everybody. Thank you for taking an hour out of your morning to join us. And I know it's going to be a glorious sunny day, so please stay with us for the hour. We don't want to see anyone running off with surfboards and making the most of the sunshine. So just hang in there for this full hour. Really excited to be launching our research today. It's actually the second piece of research that the Communities Creating Homes programme has commissioned during the 2 years that it's been running. The first piece was around 2 years ago, and this piece now, living in cooperative and community-led housing during COVID. I think for me, the most exciting bit about the research we do is it's based on lived experiences, because quite often, certainly for the community-led housing sector, a lot of the research in previous years has been based on the viewpoints of organisations that support the creation of community-led housing, but it's not about the people who actually live in it. And actually, for me, their viewpoint is much stronger and has much more value, because actually listening to what people say and what people need can really help us kind of shape the services that we provide to actually support and develop a much stronger community-led housing movement. And certainly for us here in Wales, but also across other parts of the UK, and we can share that learning as well. So the speakers we've got today, so we've got Dr. Leon Quinn, who's from the Social Effectiveness Research Centre, who conducted the research for us. So Leon's going to be on speaking first, and then Claire, who's very kindly already introduced herself, who's a key member of the Communities Creating Homes team. I know Claire says that she just does monitoring and evaluation, but trust me, Claire's role is much bigger than just that, and has been instrumental in leading on the research and supporting Leon with it. So I'm going to hand over to Leon now, so he can tell you the exciting bits about what we've learned from the research. If I can ask people to save your questions for the end, and we've allocated some time for Q&A at the end, if that's okay with everyone. And if you put your questions into the chat box, and we can pick from there. Lovely, thanks, and over to Leon. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this launch. I think there's only one thing better than listening to a presentation on a beautiful, warm, sunny day, and that's getting to see some PowerPoint slides while you do it. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some slides as we go, but I will try and keep this as short as I reasonably can. But what I want to do is just kind of run through the research, pick out some of the key findings and some of the kind of interesting things that came up for us as the research screen. So I'll just put the first slide up. So hopefully everyone can see that. Shout if you can see it. And everyone can still hear me. Okay. Right, so as Joe said, my name's Leon Quinn. I'm from the Social Effectiveness Research Centre, and I was the research lead for this project. The team also included Val Williams and Barbara Parkinson. Val's here today. Unfortunately, Barbara couldn't make it. And we all worked on the previous piece of research we did for the centre back in 2019. That larger piece of research looked at the potential benefits of living in cooperative and community-led housing, or CCLH for short, across England and Wales. And that research found evidence for benefits in a variety of areas. Improved physical health and mental well-being, greater community feeling, reduced loneliness and social isolation. We also found quite a few improved financial situations, increased skills and confidence, and an increased ability for people to live in tune with their values and their environment. So that was the earlier pre-COVID research. Obviously, though, if you wanted to stress test those kind of potential benefits in practice, a global pandemic is a pretty good way to do it. So in the summer of last year, the centre asked us to do another piece of work, seeking out CCLH residents' views very specifically on how their experience of the pandemic was affected for good or for bad by their chosen form of housing. In other words, how living in cooperative or community-led housing rather than any other form, be it owner-occupiership, private rented sector, social housing, whatever it was, how that had affected their experience of COVID-19, of lockdown, and of the pandemic. In doing so, as in the previous piece of research, we took a primarily qualitative approach. It was a complex question, and our key concern throughout was to try to amplify residents' voices directly wherever possible. So in terms of methodology, as with the previous larger piece of work, we decided to take a grounded theory-based approach. I won't go into the detail of grounded theory here because it's quite complicated, but suffice it to say that with grounded theory, you don't determine your sample size in advance. Rather, you cease sampling when whatever theory emerges from the data has become stable. In this case, the categories of advantage and disadvantage caused by living in CCLH during the pandemic. For this project, the data stabilised after around a dozen responses, but we kept it open a little while after that just to be sure, hence the final overall number of participants that you can see. As the slide also says, participants were drawn from at least 10 schemes, which were spread all across Wales in geographical terms. The exact number of the schemes in the sample can't be quantified precisely, as participants were given the option of responding anonymously if they wanted to, in which case they only needed to give the broad area of Wales where their scheme was located, so North, South, Mid, West Wales and so on. 3 participants took up this option, so the most we can say is that the final overall number of schemes in the sample was a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 13. Types of scheme in the sample included cooperatives, co-housing schemes, community land trusts, right to manage schemes, schemes of many different sizes, varying from a handful of residents to ones with hundreds. And we had responses from residents of all different types of tenure length, ranging from just a few months to several decades. So it was a diverse sample, but what we found in terms of results had a lot of commonalities. Probably the headline finding was the predominance of advantages compared to disadvantages that were perceived as having arisen from being in CCLH during the pandemic. Of all the things mentioned, of all the impacts mentioned, almost 3/4 were positive and only around 1/4 were negative. So in other words, the benefits of living in CCLH during the pandemic, rather than any other form of housing, outweighed the challenges by roughly 3 to 1. And hopefully you can see the graph on the screen, but looking at how those advantages broke down, the most commonly mentioned ones of all were practical ones, day-to-day support with tasks like shopping, cooking, and so on. Another commonly mentioned harder type of benefit was better living conditions, particularly having more space inside and outside of the home than residents felt they would otherwise have had if they'd been living in a different form of housing. Often this went together with affordability, and increased financial security in general was another fairly hard benefit to emerge from the research, as some CCLH schemes were able to be more flexible than some non-CCLH providers might have been, with things like rent arrears, residents being put on furlough, losing their jobs, and so on. At the same time, softer benefits were seen as equally important, with reduced social isolation and loneliness and greater social support forming the second main category of benefit, as you can see there. And again, this went together with reduced psychological distress in general because of the more supportive form of housing that participants felt they were living in. Finally, some residents also felt they had been able to link more quickly and more effectively with the wider community as a result of being in their scheme, particularly when taking action to mitigate the negative impacts of the pandemic on other people in the community. So obviously, these were only the general categories, and it's really important to say that whenever you talk about advantages or disadvantages, there were always exceptions, and people's experience of the pandemic varied across the whole spectrum. But the quote at the top of this slide was overall fairly representative of the majority of feedback, namely that CCLH schemes did better in the face of the collective threat of the pandemic because of the principles and structures that they needed to pull together and try and mitigate it and try and fight it were already in place. That was a real common theme running through the feedback, as expressed in the quote at the top. Owing to our communal structure, I think we were more resilient towards the negative effects of the pandemic. There was another participant who said something very similar, which I haven't actually put on the slide, but they pointed out that some of these benefits might have been available to anyone living in a shared household of any kind, CCLH or non-CCLH. But because we are part of a collective, there were existing systems to facilitate support between members. Oops. So I didn't include that quote because I wanted to sort of include the second one that's on the slide there, because that was the other key point relating to advantages beyond kind of the amount and type, namely that most residents felt there were numerous ways in which living in CCLH had helped them during COVID, not just one. Almost no one mentioned only one kind of advantage. It was almost always several. So in this case, in the second quote, the advantages are physical, psychological, but also organisational. Again, the importance of a collective culture and collective values recurs, this time in the form of being already used to the kind of give and take when sharing communal spaces that suddenly became so important with the advent of COVID. So those were the advantages, and they made up most of the the factors identified. As I said previously, though, there were nonetheless some disadvantages reported by participants. The most common, as you can see from the graph, was greater perceived difficulties around social distancing, other lockdown rules than would have been the case in a non-CCLH scheme or a different form of housing. And there do seem to have been some genuine difficulties with this in a minority of cases. Often, what we found when we were sort of reading through in detail, this seemed to underline the importance of cooperative principles and their depth or lack of depth in a given CCLH scheme in deciding how well that scheme functioned under the pressure of the pandemic. This wasn't always the case, though. Partly, these instances were also seen as arising from the generally larger household size to be found in cooperative and community-led housing. As mentioned, there were some smaller schemes in the sample, but generally participants were living in schemes which had more residents than your average private rented sector, owner-occupied house, social housing household would have. And I mean, anyone who went through lockdown in a large non-CCLH multi-generational household or in sort of blended family households where the children are moving between different homes and the bubble is quite big, they will know that there are greater challenges that bigger household size brings in itself and in and of itself, regardless of the exact form of housing it exists in. Nevertheless, in terms of the disadvantage, there does seem to have been a desire among a significant number of residents, a significant minority, for more support, more formalised training and processes to help with conflict situations like this. And this was something that came out in the pre-COVID research as well. So the first quote on this slide is, I think, fairly representative of a key challenge that faced some participants. We are a very social house. Normally we'd have guests around most of the time. Some people want to get back to normal faster than others. If I was living alone, I would obviously decide myself at what pace I would like to travel. even where people didn't explicitly compare larger households to smaller ones, as this participant here quite reasonably does, living in a smaller household, alone or in a nuclear family, that seems to have been the model that first comes to people's minds when thinking about CCLH versus non-CCLH. So it's worth keeping in mind that lens when considering the advantages as well as the disadvantages outlined in this report. Finally, though, in terms of disadvantages, the other two quotes on the slide reflect the other main challenge identified by participants, which was adapting governance systems to a situation where things can no longer be done face-to-face, where discussions are harder because they have to be done remotely or in some other socially distanced kind of way. As the first quote, the one in the middle, says, Zoom is okay, but it's not the same as actually interacting. And the kind of softer, informal interactions that go around formal meetings and make up so much of co-op and co-housing life. And then the quote at the bottom sums up a kind of common thing, which was that when it was harder to meet as a group, you can end up with a backlog of issues that are harder to deal with. As with the advantages, it is important to say that for every sort of broad trend or common finding that was in a lot of the feedback, there would be somebody who'd had a different experience or had a different view. I remember one of the interviewees saying that they actually thought that not being able to meet face to face had speeded things up because people were willing to spend less time talking and tried to spend less time doing things by Zoom than they would have done if it was all in person. So there is always a diversity of views. But with that challenge in mind, that very specific challenge about not making everybody look at Zoom for too long, I'll maybe bring this presentation towards a conclusion. So I won't go through in detail the first two bullet points at the top here. They are essentially just sort of reiterating the main findings of the research about there being many more advantages than disadvantages and the types of advantage that were identified. But I will flag up the third point at the bottom there, because I think it's quite an important one. This piece of research did uncover some new additional support needs that arose directly from the experience of the pandemic, that were different from the additional needs that came out during the first piece of research 2 years ago. The first of these was around financial support. There seemed to be a lack of certainty sometimes as to where CCLH schemes and also the residents within them fitted in terms of ability to access government or other financial support if required. In the words of one participant, often we seem to fall outside the box or the criteria. And certainly we came across that. And then the other main need identified was for greater mutual support between schemes, greater peer support. One resident summed up their scheme's experience of the pandemic as having both made them feel more vulnerable as an organisation, but also wanting to feel more connected to other cooperative and community-led housing schemes. So I'll leave you with the recommendations for future action that were based on the key findings I've outlined in this presentation. I'll just run through them very quickly. The first one is about the Cooperative Centre and other stakeholders just doing more awareness raising about the way that the principles, the values, call them cooperative values, call them communal values, call them whatever you want, the role they play in the outcomes that people achieve just through living in cooperative and community-led housing. The increases in health and well-being, resilience levels in the faces of things like the pandemic or other crises. It's raising awareness of that link between the principles and the structures, and that it's not just about things like community-led housing usually has, you know, bigger spaces to move around in, or is financially more stable and things like that. It goes beyond that, and I think that's a really important point for everyone to make when they're talking about it. The second recommendation is a bit more targeted. It's about the idea of having a specific advocacy campaign, policy and influencing effort, just to make sure that CCLH schemes, CCLH residents are not excluded from both COVID support measures and post-COVID measures that will, you know, build everything back in theory. I think with this one, we got the impression that this could happen by accident, or, you know, this could be done by policymakers without necessarily even trying. We found sort of odd instances of problems that occurred almost by accident. So I think this is a key thing as we move forward and maybe move beyond COVID to make sure we're taking action on. And then the final recommendation is for the Co-op Centre, for all stakeholders, but also for the schemes themselves to redouble their efforts to get closer links between each other and get peer support networks going, particularly around things like sharing best practice in response to COVID. A lot of the schemes have done some quite amazing things and responded to the pandemic in quite amazing ways. You know, setting up printing presses in their sheds and doing all sorts of amazing things, but quite often it felt like each scheme was kind of puzzling its way out for itself. And people do look to the Co-operative Centre and other central bodies for information, and that came later in the lockdown, according to some of the interviews we spoke to. But the stronger the peer support networks are, I think the stronger and the more prepared CCLH schemes will be for the next crisis, the next pandemic, whatever it is. So those are the recommendations, but I would, of course, also recommend any of you can find the time to somehow read the whole report to do so. It is only a couple of dozen pages, and then there is a much shorter summary of just a few pages, because it's all very well me summarising what the key findings are, but the only way to really understand the kind of complexity and diversity of ways in which people living in cooperative and community-led housing schemes in Wales experienced the first COVID lockdown is to listen and to see as many of those voices as possible. This has only been a relatively quick and small scale piece of research compared to the much bigger one we did in 2019. But putting across the views of as many residents as possible, as directly as possible, has been what we've tried to do as a research team above all. So the final thing I will say is just a simple thank you to the Wales Co-operative Centre for recognising the value and the suitability of that approach for capturing a complex comparison like this. And a very big thank you to all the residents that took part in the research for their thoughtful and very reflective contributions. Like the previous piece of research 2 years ago, they made this project not just enjoyable, but quite inspiring to do and a privilege to carry out. So thank you.
Thanks, Leon. We're going to be sharing the research after the event today, so we'll send out the executive summary directly to you, and we'll have it online, hopefully by the end of the week. So we'll make sure that gets out to you so you can read that. And I'd really recommend, you know, paying attention to the case studies in there. One of my favourite quotes in there is someone who says that they think their kids are the luckiest kids in the world because they've got so much space to run around in during the pandemic. And I think as we've seen in the media, that kind of that desire for more space is something that's come out of the pandemic and is becoming a priority for people, you know, as proven by the housing market. So I'm going to share my screen with you as well for a quick presentation. So hopefully it won't take too long. I'll just find it. So as I said earlier, I'm the monitoring and evaluation officer for the project. I'm also an accredited housing advisor as well. So I've been working directly with a couple of groups alongside the monitoring and evaluation work. Today I'm going to reflect on what some of Leon has said, but also talk to you about the current position of the project, how we deliver support to groups who are looking to develop their own schemes, as well as supporting existing schemes that we may or may not have helped to set up in the first place. It does vary there, but those schemes, they might be ones that are looking to change, grow, or become more sustainable. And there's certainly been more support required since the pandemic for some of those groups as well, more so than when we first started this project in 2019. And also talk about how we've had to adapt what we do during the pandemic. So as you can see from the research, we've there are many benefits to living in community-led housing as opposed to other types of housing for the residents, although it's not without its challenges at times, and the last year has definitely presented plenty of those for us as a project, but also the groups that we work with and the stakeholders that we've had to engage with. And we've had to be sensitive to that. Priorities have understandably had to shift for a lot of us. Members of both existing housing, community-led housing schemes and groups starting to explore their housing options have had to endure 2 lockdowns. We're just coming out of the 3rd one now. Illness, unfortunately, loss of loved ones, and in some cases, loss of income. As the community-led housing hub for Wales, we've had to change our way of working when we could no longer go out and meet groups where they are. Even as this latest lockdown begins to ease, we're still working online, delivering networking sessions, training, and meeting one-to-one with clients over Microsoft Teams and Zoom like today, or whatever suits the client really. So we'll go along with them. There's so many options, isn't there, to meet online. But I'm sure that what my colleagues would agree with is something that has been uplifting despite, you know, the recent and ongoing difficult times, is that we're seeing the cooperative values of the groups we work with constantly being reinforced. They're proving their resilience and strength as they continue to work towards creating viable and sustainable community-led housing schemes. And for us, our motivation runs far deeper than enabling groups to create more housing. We want to enable them to create communities, and in turn, we want to influence the external environment, including government policy and the housing sector in general, to make it easier to create viable community-led housing schemes. And the recommendations of the research reflect this, and our ongoing work over the next year will include delivering on those recommendations. The Wales Cooperative Centre itself has worked for several years in this sector, initially with housing cooperatives, and now through this project since April 2019 with all types of community-led housing schemes. So we know and believe in the capacity of communities to become strong, resilient, and supportive of the different needs of the people who make up that community. And that's through them collaboratively working to take control of their housing needs. And the goal of communities creating homes is, as much as it is to increase the number of affordable community-led housing schemes, it's also about creating a thriving community-led housing movement in Wales. Sorry, just grab my notes. So at the moment, we're working with a cohort of 51 clients across Wales. 43 of those are developing new schemes, and that varies. So it might be people who are looking at something like retrofitting, to people who want to self-build their own homes or work with a developer, including housing associations. And they are looking in all to, at the moment, they're telling us they want to create 634 community-led homes. The remaining 8 clients that we're working with are existing community-led housing schemes, and that consists of approximately 127 homes. But no 2 community-led housing schemes are completely alike, and the range of delivery models vary from communities that want to set up a community land trust that creates homes which are affordable now and for all future residents, through to housing cooperatives, co-housing schemes, tenant and right to manage schemes. So that's people who are already perhaps living in properties who want to manage their own services as part of a cooperative framework. Our priorities are to work with groups who are committed to creating schemes that will make their decisions democratically. So they'll share decision making, usually on a one person, one vote basis. And they intend to meet a local affordable housing need. But they're also committed to the community-led to taking the community-led housing movement forward. So one thing that we do recognise is that as a project, we are reliant upon our clients sharing case studies, talking to us about, lessons that we can learn and so on. And that's a big part of my role. And sort of to talk about some of the clients that we've got people in different parts of Wales who want to mitigate the impact of second home ownership by setting up community land trusts, which will house local people who might otherwise leave an area because they can't afford to stay there. So where you do have areas of Wales, we've got clients in Pembrokeshire and also in Gwynedd who are looking to do this because they see the impact of second home ownership on their communities. We've also got housing cooperatives who want to purchase their property and their land from their landlord to ensure their existing community is sustainable, doesn't become dispersed, and they can remain a community hub for the future. So during the pandemic, one great example of this is Ymunwch Housing Cooperative, who contributed to their wider community by being part of the coordination of a town-wide initiative to support vulnerable and shielding people with things like shopping, picking up prescriptions, hosting online activities for the local, for their local community. And we're also working with the co-housing scheme at the moment, where those who do have capital to contribute to the purchase of the property are investing it for others who aren't in a position to invest capital of their own. So they can also benefit there. And our clients are as unique as the communities where they are based. So when you go to one town in Wales, it's not going to be the same as the next town, and our communities are as unique as that. So last spring, as we locked down for the first time, we found ourselves having to cancel planned face-to-face events and networks to take them online. Our monthly, always community-led housing network has been a great achievement of the past year. We've had good attendance at each event, made up of clients and different stakeholders as well. It's allowed us to bring people and groups around a virtual table that we'd never get in a physical room together, and clients are benefiting from the peer-to-peer support, group discussions, and learning about resources, organisations and other initiatives that can help them move forward. And as a result of that, we're now piloting virtual local meetups, which are smaller groups that come together on a regional basis to make links with other groups close to where they are based, share knowledge and have informal discussions about the challenges that they are facing. And I think that that picks up on some of the recommendations of this research as well. And we've done that based on feedback that's come through the wider network. Autumn of last year, we held our first community-led housing festival. So you can see one of our promotional images on the slide there from that. And that had a theme of regenerating and revitalising communities. So we've reflected on lessons learned from that event and are planning a bigger one for this year. We've also created new resources and tools, including a planning guide for community-led housing with Planning Aid Wales. And those resources can be found on our website, and they continue to be important as we work remotely for the time being. And we're also continuing to put into practice our training as accredited community-led housing advisors. So that includes refining our processes and resources to fit the needs of anyone who wants to develop community-led housing, as well as our work with different groups. We've held webinars and exploring different legal structures that groups can adopt, visioning to help groups tell the story of their community-led housing idea, and understanding different delivery models of community-led housing. Next month, we're launching a series of workshops that would take groups through developing community-led housing from conception to completion. And we've linked these to the Royal Institute of British Architects plan of work, and that will include explaining how we as a project can support groups at each point. So a key element of how we work is to listen and respond to our clients and those making new inquiries. As Leon's explained, the picture painted by the small cohort of residents who took part in the research is in the main a positive one, and we want to share that message as widely as we can. Community-led housing has benefits both practical in terms of informal care and help with everyday tasks for more vulnerable community members, but there's still the less visible but important impacts on well-being. Residents do see their communities as more resilient, and their cooperative values have been demonstrated by the way that they've been handling the difficulties of the pandemic and the lockdowns. Some groups looking to develop have slowed down due to the pandemic, but there's others that have used the time to move forward at a faster pace. One member of a group I recently spoke to told me that the pandemic had allowed her to slow down and spend time she may not otherwise have had, contributing to the development of this scheme as an active steering group member. And looking to the future, our current awareness raising campaign, so the image there gives you a glimpse of the sort of message that we're trying to put out there. And you may have heard about us on a local radio station, or even had a leaflet come through your door. And this campaign really puts communities at the centre of what we're about. So we've got a newly developed welcome pack which explains our process, points groups and individuals to next steps, and encourages them to create an expression of interest in the project so we can get a sense of what they want to achieve as soon as we start working with them. And it's very much a message to reflect current times. So to steal a phrase from politicians, as we look to build back better and reach the other side of the pandemic, I think community-led housing really has a role in terms of how we think about housing going forward, and the benefits highlighted in the research, where we've got supportive intergenerational communities demonstrating that there is a different way of living, inclusive of taking care of others, and housing and the communal space within it can be designed to add to positive well-being. And all of this just strengthens an argument for more people taking the lead in providing their own housing solutions. So just about there for those of you waiting. So while we continue to look forward, our support continues to be bespoke to reflect how unique each group we work with is, you know, in the same way that the communities themselves are unique. And we can only do so much. So we do look to teach clients how to fish rather than to feed them for a day, for want of a better phrase. But what clients can expect from us is, you know, continued networking opportunities, sharing information, best practice, making links with like-minded people, visioning sessions and action planning. The foundation of how we work with work and action plans with clients is to help them tell the story of their community-led housing idea. We want them to articulate their vision early on, so it acts as an anchor if they start to veer off track. But that doesn't mean that it can't change if it needs to, as they learn more and refine what they want to achieve. We can help groups conduct their own research in terms of assisting with the design of housing needs surveys, facilitating study visits, which is something we'll be keen to get to as soon as we're able to. And we do look at ways, you know, to help people learn from other groups virtually as well. And also things like responding to local development plan consultations, so that groups can have a say and an influence over what's happening locally. We can help clients consider possible legal structures and models and look at the governing rules, developing a site finding brief and considering the feasibility of sites and preparing to apply for planning, but also looking at possible sources of funding and finance and putting that package together, and considering what agreements and policies they'll eventually need to put in place, as and accessing specialist support for them as well. But also looking at strategies and visions for their long-term sustainability. So onto our last slide, and I really hope that it's clear that for us, it's all about thinking about housing differently and as something much more than a roof over people's heads. For organisations like local authorities and housing associations, for example, supporting community-led housing can allow them to take an innovative approach to housing that not only delivers sustainable, affordable homes, but also allows the residents to take control of their housing, improving their well-being and being part of a self-supporting community, as evidenced in our research today. And I think for clients, it's a way to realise that they can live in a caring community in housing that may otherwise be out of reach for them. So, so I'm going to open up for questions for myself and the team now, and also Leon, based on that. I'll just stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. It's always a bit weird, isn't it, when everyone disappears off your screen when you're sharing a presentation. But I hope, you know, I hope from that it kind of gives you a sense of where we are, and a sense of the client's voice as well. It comes through really strongly in the research, I believe, and we'll be, as part of our marketing campaign, we're actually filming with some clients, you know, observing social distancing still, but we're working with a company, a media company, to actually do that. So we'll have more case studies to share shortly. So I'll just open up for questions, if anyone has any, for myself or Leon. We'll be able to give you a link to the executive summary. I can see that someone's asked that in the chat too.
And I think the previous report as well, is that what that question is about?
Yes, we can do that too. So we've got that online. So I think they actually go so well together, as well, as I'm sure Leon will say too. So in case he's kindly shared that already. Thank you. Hi, Hugh.
Hi, hi everybody. Hugh Russell, currently working at SAMI, but I'll be joining the team in June. I'm really excited to meet you properly. Thanks for a fab couple of presentations. I'm really interested in the peer support that Leon, you mentioned as your third recommendation, I think. Have there been benefits in the way that we've shifted to working like this in terms of peer support? Have you been able to, I don't know, link community land trusts in Wales with community land trusts in Scotland, because now we can do it at the click of a button rather than, you know, having to hire a minibus?
I think it's something we're looking more closely at. A lot of groups have told me informally how much they've benefited from peer support, and that is happening on an informal basis. But one of the things that we want to explore over the next month or two is facilitating that even further, possibly setting up a Slack group and so on. And certainly the CCLH Fest did bring groups together from all across the country, and one of the pieces of feedback from that was that they got to hear, and Casey, who's from the team, was really involved in the community-led housing fest and pulling it all together. But we did manage to get groups from all across the country together to share their experiences, and I think people found that really inspiring in terms of regeneration. There's a few that stick in my mind from that we'd like to see more of that happening in Wales, and it certainly does happen through our monthly networking as well.
It was one of the aims when we originally wrote the programme bid for the 3-year programme, was to set up sustainable peer support networks. You know, because I guess it's like any work that you do, isn't it? Whilst everyone wants to be kept in jobs, ultimately it's about how you facilitate and give people the skills and the experience, that they have that knowledge, that they can then take that back to their communities and kind of grow and kind of apply that knowledge. So it's one of the kind of key principles that we want to achieve over the 3 years of the programme, is to get those self-sustaining peer support networks in place.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, did you want to mention anything about the kind of the peer research idea that we were sort of booting around before COVID hit, basically? Because I can see Mark's put a question on the chat about the kind of more research to undertake to undertake whether there'll be more research to explore the longer term benefits of community-led housing. Well, our feeling was, after the first report, and it's probably only been strengthened by this one as well, was what we really needed to do is to build up peer research capacity. So not people coming from outside and doing it and sort of trying to get residents to do it for themselves almost, or at least to become much more involved in that. And we did sort of have kind of training schemes and things like that, projects around that in mind. And then the pandemic hit, and you can't do anything face to face. And that kind of thing really does need that kind of face to face relationship. A more general point about the pandemic is so many of us have been able to move to Zoom and do things remotely because we already had those personal relationships. You know, I've already met lots and lots of people who are here. You know, they're not just seeing me on Zoom, they don't just know me from Zoom, and that is so important. But when you're sort of starting something bigger with people that you don't necessarily know so well, that face-to-face thing is so important. So that's sort of been put on the back burner, I think it's fair to say, because of that. But I think that was the general way we were thinking. But Joe, you'll be able to say much more than me about that. But
yeah, definitely. You know, for us, it's all about, you know, giving people the skills, the capability and the knowledge to kind of develop schemes for themselves. And, you know, the team came up with some ideas. We spoke to Leon about this, setting up a network of peer researchers, but people who actually live in community-led housing. So yes, we'd kind of worked up a proposal. We were looking to kind of go ahead with that, but then the pandemic hit, so we just had to kind of put that to one side. It's something we would certainly still like to do, but I think we just have to see where we go with lockdown, you know, in terms of this current funded programme, because like Leon said, you really need to get those people together. to kind of kickstart a program like that. I think it would be a lot more challenging on Zoom. So I think we just got to see where the lockdown goes, how quickly things start to open up and people actually feel safe kind of getting out and about and meeting each other again. But we would certainly like to go ahead with it if circumstances allow. Yeah.
And we do survey our clients as well, just asking about the benefits and their reasons for getting involved in community-led housing. And in some cases, those results are surprising because the majority of people do come back and don't necessarily put cost and quality at the top, but wanting to live more cooperatively, wanting to live in a more environmentally friendly way as well. And as well as looking at things like bringing unused land and buildings back into use, which does vary, and we're always listening to our clients anyway. And some of the work that I'm doing at the moment is about collating lessons learned and speaking directly to our clients about how things are going, what we need to take on board. And we're hoping to start sharing more of that over the next few months as we can, as we progress into the third year of the project. It's really timely to start sharing some of those lessons learned and start adjusting what we do to reflect that as well as picking up on the recommendations in both pieces of research.
I think it's interesting as well, the point around how people in community-led housing in some ways have been disadvantaged and not been able to access funding and support. And quite often when you talk about funding for community-led housing, people think, where am I going to get the money to build a scheme? This isn't about that. It's about just being able to access the benefit system, universal credit. And because DWP don't understand the makeup of a housing cooperative, it becomes very challenging then for individuals to get the benefits that they should be allowed to access. So I know we've been doing quite a bit of work with DWP to get them to understand what housing cooperatives are and the different structures. It does get challenging because there's no one simple setup. Every group has a variation or different model rules or is set up under a different way. And when you're dealing with an organisation like DWP, getting any change takes time. And we know how complicated the whole universal credit system is. So trying to kind of influence any change there. But hey, no challenge is ever too big for the Community Creating Homes team. We take them on. Doesn't matter if it's DWP, Welsh Government, whoever. So a lot of the work we do, although we might not talk about it very often, is behind the scenes trying to influence policy and kind of work through some of these issues. A recent one, there's been changes to taxation in England that might not apply to Wales, which could have a knock-on impact for community-led housing groups. So our next piece will be to kind of work with Welsh Government to look at the potential to influence some changes there as well. So we do a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we don't necessarily shout about, because just those things do take time. Any more questions from anyone?
I think I'd just like to sort of add a point sort of slightly relating to that, which is from a researcher perspective, the remit on both pieces of research, this one and the previous one, was to look at community-led housing in its broadest definition. So not to just look at cooperatives, as would have been perfectly reasonable to ask us to do, but to look at the whole spectrum. And we saw the benefits across the whole spectrum. And even on this kind of much smaller piece of research, in the previous brief research, we covered England as well, and we spoke to some pretty big sort of housing associations in England. There was a kind of whole section on providers' views as well, which we didn't do so much in this smaller piece of work, which was Wales only. But it was very noticeable, even looking around what housing associations in Wales had done. There were kind of cooperative principles and cooperative ways of doing things that were being implemented by them, particularly in their responses to the pandemic, which quite often involved setting up community help, involved talking to their members more than they had done before. So when you look at community-led housing as a whole, it seems to be a pretty big area with many very different types of scheme within it. And so in that sense, a peer research scheme is good because it captures those differences of people doing it for themselves. But I also thought it's a positive development if you're having kind of geographical subgroups for communities creating homes. But I wonder about sort of slightly thematic subgroups as well, because it is the one difficult thing is trying to talk about organisations that, you know, some of them are the size of a small dinghy and some of them are the size of an aircraft carrier. And there are different experiences, but they're all, depending on the extent to which they embody cooperative principles, democratic principles, they're all producing the same kind of benefits in some ways. It just tends to be the strongest benefits in the most cooperative, most traditionally community-led housing structures. So yeah, that was something that came through really strongly, which is a point I wish I'd said in the main presentation, but I sound like the people at the end of In Our Time, don't know, when they adding another bit. But yeah, I thought that was a really important thing that really struck us as researchers.
Wow, that's great. Thanks, Leon. So if we haven't got any other questions, I'll just take the opportunity to say thank you everyone for coming along to the launch of the research. And as Claire said, we'll share links with the exec summary for everyone that's attended, and hopefully by the end of the week the full research will be up on the website, so we can send links for everyone to access that as well. But obviously if you've got any questions, if you want to know more about the work we do, just get in touch with the team, and we'd be more than happy to have a chat with you. And enjoy the rest of the sunshine today. Thanks a lot for coming. Take care everyone. Bye.
Bye.